Today, we're going to examine a serial killer whose own mother said he was born with a need to hurt people. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings of the world, you've come to the right place. If you'd like to support the channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss video upload. Let's get started. David Edward Maust was born in Pennsylvania in 1954. Unfortunately, he didn't grow up in a happy home, and his father left his mother when he was about 7 years old. His father had been orphaned by the age of 12 and had lived in numerous foster homes. According to records, David's mother was diagnosed as mentally ill and psychotic, but it was David who truly displayed some terrifying behavior. At the age of 9, David would set his brother's bed on fire. Later that year, David would try to drown his brother by pinning him underwater. His brother would later recall that one day him and David went to the park, and David had been carrying a baseball bat. He would take that baseball bat and beat a squirrel to death, and his brother recalls he just did this seemingly for fun. It's really no surprise that at this point, David's mother brought him to a mental health institute. At the request of his mother, at the age of 9 years old, David was institutionalized. Although David's mother told the hospital that he set fire to his brother's bed and that he tried to drown him, social workers would describe his mother as disturbed, psychotic, and functioning marginally. She was needy and very narcissistic. She had also spent a month in a mental health hospital in Pennsylvania. A later report on David said the institution where he was confined was filled with children who were there more often than not because family members were mentally ill and couldn't or wouldn't take care of them. The institution simply felt that David's mother dumped him there. The staff would say that they didn't observe him lying, stealing, or any out-of-control behavior. While his mother visited, they would ask her what specific trouble that David had been getting into while he was at home. But she really didn't specify. She would end up saying she just doesn't want him at home. The thing is, David did have an early history of violence. He choked 2 of his friends for seemingly no reason at all. David's brother Jeffrey would later recall that David had been molested at an early age. The thing is, at the hospital, David was well behaved, but he seemed despondent over his mother's failure to visit him with any sort of regularity. When he left the hospital, he went to a children's home where at the age of 13, he was subjected to unwanted sexual advances by another boy. His life seemed to turn around because as a young adult, he would work construction for his uncle in Georgia, and it seemed that he was a skilled worker, but he was fired after crashing a company truck. At one point, when David was a young boy and he was in the psychiatric hospital, he did escape. When he escaped the hospital, he went to a Cubs game, and then he would return home to his mother, and by now she had remarried. David would recall this visit later in life while writing in his journal. He would go on to say, "She got a knife and was coming at me with the knife, telling me to get out of her house right now, or she was going to stab me with that knife. She did later apologize. My mother told me, 'David, I'm sorry, I just don't want you in my house.' So to keep this 17-year-old son away from her home, in the summer of 1971, she would take David to a local U.S. Army recruiter. During this time, the Vietnam War was raging on, and she knew that it was probable he would be a part of it. He completed basic training in 1972 and was stationed in Frankfurt, Germany. There, he served as a cook and was by all accounts an able serviceman. Unfortunately, even the army couldn't keep David from killing. In 1974, while stationed in Germany, David would kill a 13-year-old boy named James McClister. He would claim that the boy's death was the result of an accident on a moped which he had stolen. He was only sentenced to 4 years in prison, and although David never requested to be granted parole, he was released in 1977 despite his wishes. David would later write that he woke to find the boy he had befriended sleeping naked on top of him. He said that he was undressed too and that the episode upset him, and then a month later, he and the boy went for a moped ride in a nearby forest. He would take out a knife and lead the boy deeper into the woods. He would tie the boy to a tree and beat him with his fists and then a board. In his journal, he would write, "I never told anybody the truth about that night because it was a sad, bad thing. He was a very good boy and he did not deserve what happened to him on that sad night in May. I was angry with myself because I did not know what to do for the boy now. So I picked Jimmy up so I could take him deep into the woods to hide him. And after about 10 feet, Jimmy died in my arms. I put leaves over him to hide him, and then I left the woods. And that was about James McClister, whom he called Jimmy. The thing is, this by no means was an accident. In fact, David had promised himself nearly 7 months earlier that he was going to kill James. He would go on to write, "I thought to myself at that moment that when Jimmy gets long hair, I'm going to kill him. When I killed Jimmy on that day, Jimmy had long hair." About a month later, the body of the boy was found in a bomb crater. Apparently, David's defense attorney happened to be a good one because he argued that the boy died after he crashed the moped because some teens threw a screwdriver into the spoke of the tires. And David was convicted of manslaughter because prosecutors simply could not find any witnesses in the case. David would write in his journal, "When I got locked up in the Army, and then especially when I got locked up in 1981, I knew I should never be let out again. I didn't know how to act around other people, and I was never taught how to make friends and keep them. When an inmate says he doesn't want out, I hope that somebody listens." And then in 1979, David was in his apartment in Chicago. David would stab a friend while he was sleeping. David would be tried for attempted murder. Later, in a diary entry, David said that he lied on the witness stand and said he didn't do it. And it appears he was found not guilty. This to me is mind-boggling. Presumably, there's only 2 people in that apartment, David and the friend he stabbed. I can't even begin to imagine what argument was used in court. And how did he get away with this? If he wasn't the one that stabbed his friend, who did? And how did a jury believe this? The whole situation is just absolutely mind-boggling to me. At this point, David knew that he really wasn't fit for the outside world. One morning, after driving past a mental health hospital, he would later write, "I thought to myself that it would not be so bad being in there the rest of my life, because I would not be able to hurt someone anymore, and then maybe I could get some help." But in 1981, David was on a new mission entirely. He decided that he was going to find and kill the boy that had molested him in that home. Although he was unable to find the boy that assaulted him when they were both juveniles, unfortunately, he stumbled across another victim. David would come across 15-year-old Donald Jones, and he would kill him. David would write in his journal, "I can still hear Donald Jones saying to me, 'I'm only 15 years old. Please don't kill me.'" He would take Jones to the water and drown him. He would write, "I have been thinking about Donald Jones a lot and what I did to him on that Sunday in August, and I've been thinking about the bad thing I did in my life. And now I would like to have the death sentence. I would like to die." In Texas, during the same year, David would stab a 14-year-old boy. He was arrested and sentenced to 5 years for causing bodily injury to a child. Again, it appears he continues to get away with what he's doing. He murders a boy in Germany, he stabs a friend, he harms another boy, and yet he just gets these light prison sentences and nobody seems to be stopping him. And then in 1982, while in jail in Texas, David was extradited to Illinois for the Donald Jones murder. On the cover sheet of the extradition papers sent to Texas, a sheriff would write, "Bad guy, Gacy type." Because he was found unfit to stand trial, he was held in a mental health facility. After those hospitalizations and about 10 years in jail waiting for trial, David pled guilty in 1994 and was sentenced to 35 years. He did receive credit for the 12 years he was held, and then he got time off for good behavior. Altogether, he served 17 years and was released in 1999. At this point, you're probably shaking your head as I am. I mean, another time he's harmed a child and he's set free. And he doesn't want to be set free. He wants to stay in jail. And yet they keep letting him go. He's extremely dangerous. He's an absolute monster. And it doesn't seem he can control himself. Not only does he have a history of being dangerous, he murdered more than one child. And he's harmed other children. And he's still set free. It feels like they knew he was an absolutely dangerous person and didn't care. A fact sheet was sent to the Department of Corrections in Illinois. In that fact sheet, it stated, "This inmate is most likely the most dangerous inmate you will house." Apparently, the prosecutor did argue that David should be kept incarcerated, but under the law, David was eligible for early release. David would write a 5-page letter to the Illinois Department of Corrections requesting to not be released from prison, but he didn't meet the criteria to be placed in any other kind of facility, which is absolutely shocking given the fact that he was very mentally ill. In 2001, David would hit an acquaintance 6 times in the back of the head with a metal pipe, and yet another attempted murder. But he was not prosecuted because although the acquaintance reported it to the police, he didn't want to pursue prosecution. On December 12, 2003, David Maust was arrested for strangling to death James Reganavi. James's body was found encased in concrete in David's basement. in Indiana. And then he was later charged with the deaths of Michael Dennis, who was 13, and Nick James, who was 19. Both boys had been wrapped in plastic and encased in concrete. Both James and Michael Dennis were reported missing on September 10, 2003. And in November 2005, David pled guilty for the 3 murders and was finally sentenced to 3 life terms. In January of 2006, about a month after his sentencing, David would commit suicide by hanging himself in jail. In his cell was a suicide note in which he would confess to 5 killings and apologize to the victims' families. He was 51 years old. In a 1983 diary entry, David said he wanted to come clean and that he was sick of telling so many lies. He would write, "I just hope nobody will make fun of me because of what I said in the statement, because it's not funny. I wish I did not have to tell anybody about this. And I only blame myself. What I had done in my life is bad things to good people. I cannot remember the good things I did in my life, but I can remember the bad things, because when you do one bad thing, it takes away the good." David would also write about being institutionalized by his mother. He would say, "I remember when I stood before the judge when I was 9 years old for the things I did bad, and the judge gave me 4 years. I never understood why I was put there until now. But back then I thought it was for running away from home, or for taking something from a store, or just being a bad kid. And I know I was not retarded, but when I left there in 1967 to go to the children's home, I think my mind was a little off." David would write that he was just one of those people that fell through the cracks, that he really did need psychiatric care and didn't receive it. The thing about David is he knew he needed help, and he knew he was falling through the cracks. He didn't want to leave jail. He didn't want to leave the mental health institutions. He was pretty much forced out of them. Perhaps if he had been born in another time, he would have gotten the help he needed. But all in all, David would continue to hurt people, and he made the decision to do so. But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video and want to support the channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. If there's a case you'd like me to cover, pop in the comments below and I'll be sure to get to it. In the meantime, check out some other videos on my channel while you wait for the next upload, and I'll see you then.